You may have noticed if you watch the channel quite a bit that I haven't made any videos in a handful of days, maybe a week, 10 days. Normally in the winter I've got lots more time to make videos. The reason we haven't made any videos is because this last week has been an absolute marathon work session. Juan and I have been working feverishly out in the woods and made a ton of headway. We rented a machine to do some work at our 6-acre site, and I'd like to explain what that was all about. You can see the tracks behind me. It's going to look really raw and a mess, but hopefully by the end of the video it'll make sense why we did it and what can come of it. So stick around, I'll explain it all. The first thing I should say is it looks like we've annihilated this landscape, but I want to be really clear. So we rented a skid steer, which I'll explain in more detail, but we've had very, very good cold weather. We had a foot of snow on top of about 4 inches of frozen ground. And so as your eye takes in what looks like absolute shredded landscape, there's actually 4 to 6 inches of compressed snow underneath on top of frozen ground. And I suspect for all the tracks in here, when things thaw in the spring, we'll rake the pathways off and there'll have been absolutely zero turf disturbance. And so what we did, we rented a skid steer for 30 hours of runtime. We still have a few more hours left. Now, for those of you that are sensitive to earthwork or the aesthetics of things, this is very, very raw. So hopefully it's not too shocking to the eye. Maybe for some other folks, they can get the vibe of what the value is here. But out in this glade was 3 days ago, a snow-covered area. I've talked about this in past videos. I'll see if I can find that video, and if so, I'll link to it, where I was talking about how it was this big hugel mound area. The past owners had deposited tons of logs and debris here, and I've been burying it over time. Just lots of topsoil to be had. And I wanted to convert it to a pond, but also harvest all of the topsoil while we were at it, and also harvest a huge amount of clay and sand for a bunch of cob projects. And so now we've got this 1/8-acre pond started. I know this can probably look pretty darn rough to some folks' eyes, and hopefully, actually, if you're bothered by it or if you're upset by it, let me know. I'd be interested to have dialogue with people around what our thoughts are on this. But basically, this machine, it was $1,000 to rent for, that includes delivery, to rent for a full 5 days or a week of use. And when it's all said and done, we'll probably have consumed around maybe 12 gallons of diesel, which is not nothing. But that represents 6 to 8 round trips of me driving my truck up to this landscape. And although Juan and I love digging things by hand, and we've got all sorts of wonderful ponds that are fully by hand, this allowed us to just harvest in an incredibly effective way. And I know the idea of a skid steer as a tool for making a pond is just not what people use. People use bulldozers or excavators or some combinations of machines. The skid steer, however, the reason we went for it, very, very inexpensive. There's a company in Watkins Glen, New York. I'll link to them in the description. They're really helpful, reasonable price. It's a small machine. It can pivot and turn, and so it can get through some tight areas. It's about a 6-foot wide track. And the most important thing, it is 4 PSI on the track. So it actually applies less pressure on the ground than feet. And again, looks like we've destroyed this poor place, but all of this has happened on top of snow. And so what our plan is once we get to some thaw in the spring, we will frost seed all of this disturbed soil to a dwarf white clover, so that in between the grass that's in here, there'll now be a clover mix to add some nitrogen. And we'll rake that in and see how it goes. A little ways back, we identified this patch in here as a potential spot for a cabin, roughly 30 feet in this dimension, 20 feet in this dimension, with a 10-foot overhang and a porch, so a 30 by 30 footprint. And our goal was to build it with cordwood and cob and straw bales. And so each scoop of material as it was coming out, the first passes that we had were really, really nice, rich topsoil. And so those all got deposited on hugel mounds. So you can see very, very rough sketch. We'll come back to this in the spring, either smooth them out and start planting them or simply get a cover crop on them. but there's raised garden beds now everywhere, along with deposits of topsoil near future propagation spots. The 2 pine trees we had to cut down to make space for this were processed in a way where we can let them dry slowly over time. These can be cordwood nuggets for the walls of the cabin, and this 1 tree will be the header that spans the full length of the cabin. So 2 trees died, which is sad, but they'll be able to fold right into the structure. While we were digging down, we found a cache of stone at the high point of the pond, and so we harvested all that out and organized them a bit so we can make stone pathways. We can do all sorts of raised garden beds. This is all shale through here. Easily the value of renting that machine for a week could have been put towards buying this from elsewhere. But so not only did it dig it out, but it also delivered it. And so now we've got this cache all throughout 2 of stones for the structure and pathways and gardens. Then this is a pile of sandy cob potential material, more sandy potential cob, and then a more clayey pile. And that should allow us to make all the cob we need right next to the structure and have enough left over to do an earth berm on the side. And we took it further, went through, again, looks absolutely fried, but you have to trust me, in the spring it should just be even richer and nicer in here for just having a little bit of mud on top of the snow. We identified this patch in here as well, which can be a 20 by 20 footprint. It will be an underground root cellar. We'll use tires. There's a car place right down the street that has mountains of old tires that nobody does anything with. And we'll do rammed earth tires to frame this out. We'll use this soil and this soil to fill the tires, get it nice and tall, 7 or 8 feet tall, and then bury it in extra soil. So we'll have a root cellar to store vegetables for the winter, as well as nursery crops. And so the machine was able to deliver that over here as well. And then we cached more and more topsoil very roughly, just kind of quick, boom, boom, boom. We'll come back to this in the spring, either spread it beautifully, plant it out with perennials, or simply throw daikon or some sort of flower mix, something like that. So we've started getting all these beds ready. You can see this outdoor bathroom is just getting started. We'll have to frame the walls. But now we've got these garden areas for this space and for a 16 by 24 barn as well. And each scoop that came out was basically 1.5 yards of volume that can be replaced with water in the future. So as a rough sketch, it is very rough, but now all of these different resources that are extremely high value for these different projects that we've identified in the landscape are within reasonable distance. Take your raw ingredients for cob, mix it here, apply it to the wall there. So it's all within the stroke of that now. We'll put a tire down, take the soil from there, turn around, dump it in, pack it in. So the idea was to leverage this little scuttlebutt of a machine, and boy, what a powerful little beast it was. It tried so hard and did such good work. Juan put in a ton of time with it, I put in a ton of time, and now we've got this ridiculous landscape of mountains of topsoil everywhere and stones and a huge crater. It certainly looks like a raw crater right now. We'll have to figure out, there's naturally water that moves through the landscape in this area. How do we course that in? And since we've dug enough by hand, we are very comfortable with the idea of doing the detail work of directing inflow, figuring out the clay berm at the bottom and getting that leveled and smoothed out, and chasing where we need to do that to hold water on the low end, and having this flow and access through the middle if it doesn't fill in with water. And it's about 5.5 feet deep on that end, so you can certainly cannonball from there in. And where we pulled all these rocks, we sent a ton to the future cabin site, but then also put a huge amount on the side here. And once the thaw happens in the spring, we get this organized. We can do cover cropping on the side that faces the pond, have a little walkway in the middle made out of flat stones, and then have shrubs and trees. And we've got a north-facing slope, a top part, a south-facing slope, north-facing slope over there. In other words, each one of these mounds makes for extremely complex microclimates and lots of potential. I suspect when all of this thaws in the spring, it'll look quite beautiful actually. And there's just a near infinity of follow-up work to do, but the heavy lifting quite literally has been done. And so fossil fuels, they're a mess, tons of war, really gross. But in the moment we're in, to be able to rent that machine at that rate, leverage a few gallons of diesel, never bring that machine into this property again, and have all these things cached here, way more carbon should be able to get into the earth as a result of that machine. We'll have to just do our best to make that happen. Anyway, that's my update. Let me know in the comments, do you have questions, concerns, feedback, suggestions? Always open to dialogue with folks. You are a really wonderful community, and I can trust that if you do have concerns or issues that you'll share them in thoughtful and constructive ways. I don't know if I articulate that clearly enough. I think of the comment section of the community in orbit around this channel, you folks are just so wonderful and safe and thoughtful and have great ideas. So keep that coming, and thank you so much for being part of the community. And let me know what you think of this rearrangement of soil in the landscape. We'll get back to our regularly scheduled program here soon enough, I'm sure.